Hello, everyone. I've been married to Helen for 7 years. 7 freaking years. We were the couple everyone envied. Helen has this magnetic personality that makes her the life of every party, the person everyone gravitates toward. I thought I was lucky. Turns out, I was the biggest fool in the room. The cracks started showing about a month ago, but I brushed them off. You'd think when someone changes overnight, it'd raise a red flag, but nope. I ignored it like a complete idiot. Helen started coming home late from her job at the marketing firm, always with some excuse about deadlines or client dinners. I figured work was stressing her out, so I didn't press her. Trust is the foundation of a marriage, right? That's what I told myself. Then there were the little things. She stopped wanting to cuddle before bed. She wasn't interested in sex, always claiming she was too tired or not in the mood. And the phone? Don't even get me started. She was glued to it, laughing at messages and immediately locking the screen when I walked in. When I joked about it, she rolled her eyes and called me paranoid. Fast forward to last weekend. It was my 30th birthday, and my twin brother, Michael, and I decided to throw a big party at our house. We invited everyone, friends, colleagues, even some family. Helen was in charge of the drinks and snacks, and she seemed her usual bubbly self, joking around and making everyone feel at ease. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined all the weirdness over the past few weeks. That's the thing about Helen. She's a master at wearing masks. She knows how to make you feel like you're the only person in the world, until you're not. The party was everything I wanted. At first, music was blasting, drinks were flowing, and everyone was having a great time. Michael and I were doing shots, laughing about childhood pranks, and for a brief moment, I forgot about all the tension between Helen and me. But little did I know, that night was about to become the worst night of my life. The party hit its peak around 11 p.m. The living room was packed with people laughing, drinking, and swapping stories. The smell of pizza boxes and spilled whiskey hung in the air, mixing with the bass-heavy music thumping from the speakers. I was on cloud nine, celebrating my milestone with my favorite people. Be right back, I told Michael, clinking my beer bottle against his. Gonna grab more drinks from the garage fridge. Michael gave me his usual smirk, the one that said, "Hurry up, or I'll steal your thunder." He always had that mischievous charm. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed Helen wasn't mingling with the guests like she had been earlier. I figured she was taking a breather upstairs. Helen loved being the life of the party, but sometimes she'd sneak off for a moment of quiet. I was halfway to the garage when I passed our bedroom. The door was cracked open, and I heard muffled voices inside. At first, I thought it was some of the guests using our room for privacy. No big deal. But then, I heard her voice. "Hurry up, Michael. Just hurry up so Otis doesn't see us." I froze. My mind blanked out for a second, and I wondered if I'd misheard. But no, it was Helen. And Michael. I shoved the door open without thinking, already forming a question on my lips. So that I don't see what? And there they were. Helen, my wife of 7 years, and Michael, my twin brother. Together, in my bed. The world stopped spinning. They scrambled away from each other like teenagers caught by their parents. Helen had this fake shock plastered across her face, clutching the sheets to cover herself. "Otis, wait. This isn't what it looks like." Michael just sat there, shirtless, fumbling for words. I didn't even hear him. All I could focus on was Helen's pathetic excuse. "I was drunk. I thought he was you. I swear, Otis, it was a mistake." A mistake. She thought Michael was me. How dumb did she think I was? I wasn't buying it, not for a second, especially since she just called him by his actual name. I couldn't even form a coherent thought. My hands were trembling as I stared at the two of them. The anger boiled over, and before I could stop myself, I grabbed the unopened whiskey bottle from the nightstand and hurled it at the floor. It shattered into 1,000 shards, the sound cutting through the tense silence. Without another word, I turned and slammed the door behind me. The entire house seemed to hold its breath. I stormed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. As I entered the living room, all eyes turned to me. "Otis, what's going on?" someone asked, their voice tinged with concern. I didn't even hesitate. "She cheated on me," I said, my voice cold and loud enough for everyone to hear. "With my brother." The room erupted into gasps and whispers. I didn't stick around for the aftermath. I grabbed my car keys, pushed past the shocked faces, and left without looking back. As I peeled out of the driveway, my tires screeching against the pavement, I couldn't stop shaking. This wasn't how I'd planned to celebrate my 30th birthday. This wasn't how I thought my life would be. I drove aimlessly through the night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The radio was off, but my head was louder than any song that could have played. My wife, my brother, my own bed. The images wouldn't stop flashing in my mind, like some twisted movie on repeat. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to get away. From the house, from Helen, from everything. I found myself pulling into the parking lot of some rundown diner off the highway. It wasn't even open, but I parked anyway and just sat there. The car engine hummed quietly, the only sound breaking the silence of the deserted lot. I felt like I was drowning. Minutes turned into hours before I finally drove home. It was just past dawn when I pulled into the driveway. The house stood there, silent and still, like nothing had happened. But inside, I knew it was a different story. Steeling myself, I walked in. The party remnants were everywhere. Half-empty drinks, crumpled napkins, a pizza box teetering off the coffee table. The speakers were still on, emitting a faint hum. And then, from the kitchen, I heard it. Helen, crying. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to march upstairs, pack a bag, and leave. But my feet betrayed me, and before I knew it, I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Helen was slumped against the counter, her face buried in her hands, her sobs echoing in the empty room. She looked up when she saw me, her face red and tear-streaked. "Otis," she choked out, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to speak. "Please," she begged, her hands clutching the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I made a mistake. I was drunk. You knew what you were doing," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You weren't drunk enough to forget his name." Her face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "It didn't mean anything," she cried. "It was a stupid, horrible mistake, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just don't leave me." I stared at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. "You're unbelievable, Helen." She started to say something, but I cut her off. "Pack your things. You're leaving today." Her sobs grew louder, desperate. She tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away. "Otis, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I love you." I let out a bitter laugh. "You love me? You love me so much you slept with my brother? In our house? On my birthday?" "I wasn't thinking," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Yeah," I said, my jaw tightening. "Clearly." I turned and walked out, her cries following me up the stairs. I grabbed some clothes, stuffed them into a duffel bag, and left the house without another word. I spent the night at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The sheets smelled like bleach, and the TV only had 2 working channels, but it was quiet. I lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying Helen's sobbing pleas in my head. It didn't mean anything. "I love you." What a load of crap. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Helen weasel her way back into my life with more lies. I needed to cut ties as quickly and cleanly as possible. The first call I made was to a lawyer. A friend of mine had gone through a nasty divorce a couple of years back and swore by the woman who handled his case. Her name was Vanessa Porter, and from the moment she picked up the phone, I knew I was in good hands. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice calm but commanding. And so I did. Every humiliating detail about Helen and Michael, the party, the shattered whiskey bottle, and her pathetic excuses. Vanessa listened without interrupting, her tone professional but empathetic. "You don't have hard evidence of the affair," she said finally, "but the situation with your brother will hold weight if she tries to contest anything. Do you have any joint accounts or property?" "Yeah," I said. "The house, our savings, and, God, I don't even know what else." She handled most of the finances. Vanessa sighed. "That's common, but it's also risky. I'll need access to everything, bank statements, bills, the works. If she's been hiding anything, we'll find it." We scheduled an in-person meeting for the next day, and I hung up feeling both relieved and exhausted. This was the first step. When I returned to the house that afternoon, Helen was still there. She must have heard my car pull up because she came running to the front door, looking like she hadn't slept. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair was a mess. For a split second, I felt a pang of pity, but then I remembered why she was in this state to begin with. "Otis," she started, her voice breaking. "Can we please talk? Just for a minute?" I walked past her without a word, heading straight for the kitchen. The place still looked like a bomb had gone off from the party. I grabbed a trash bag and started tossing empty bottles and plates into it, ignoring her hovering presence. "I've been calling you all night," she said, desperation creeping into her tone. "Why won't you answer me?" "Because I have nothing to say to you," I snapped, finally turning to face her. "Pack your things, Helen. You're not staying here." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Otis, this is my home, too." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "You lost that privilege when you slept with my brother." She flinched at my words, tears pooling in her eyes again. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Anything to fix this. Just tell me what to do." I let out a bitter laugh. "You can't fix this. You don't get to cry your way out of this one, Helen. Go stay with Michael if you're so desperate." Her face hardened at that, the tears vanishing as quickly as they'd come. "You're being unfair," she said, her voice icy. "Unfair?" I repeated, incredulous. "You cheated on me, and you think I'm being unfair? You were never around," she shot back, her voice rising. "Always working late, always distracted. I was lonely, Otis. What did you expect me to do?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe not screw my twin brother?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She knew there was no excuse, no justification that would make this right. I turned my back on her and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to spread through the family like wildfire. Helen must have called my mom that same day because by the time I got to Vanessa's office the next morning, my phone was blowing up with missed calls and voicemails. My mom, my dad, my cousin Tabitha, everyone wanted to know what the hell was going on. I ignored the calls at first. I wasn't ready to explain it, especially not while sitting in a lawyer's office. Vanessa went through the financials with me, her sharp eyes catching every discrepancy. Helen hadn't been outright stealing, but she'd definitely been spending more than she let on. Designer bags, spa days, even a weekend getaway I didn't remember approving. "She's been living well," Vanessa said, tapping a manicured nail on one of the statements. "But it works in your favor. If we push for the house and most of the savings, she won't have much leverage to argue." "Good," I said flatly. By the time I left Vanessa's office, I felt marginally better. At least I was doing something, taking control of the situation. But my phone was still buzzing nonstop. I finally caved and answered my mom's call when I got back to my motel. "Otis," she started, her voice tinged with both concern and disbelief. "Helen called me. She said there was an incident at your party. Something about Michael?" "Yeah," I said, cutting her off. "She slept with him, Mom. I caught them in the act." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What?" she said finally, her voice shaking. "You heard me," I said bitterly. "Your golden boy couldn't keep it in his pants, and Helen didn't exactly stop him." I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Then don't say anything," I snapped. "Unless it's to tell me why Michael thought this was okay." She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "He's your brother, Otis. He's family. Maybe this is something the two of you can work through." I let out a harsh laugh. "Family?" "He stopped being my family the moment he climbed into bed with my wife." Before she could respond, I hung up. The next call came from Michael himself. I let it go to voicemail, but the curiosity got the better of me. I hit play, my stomach churning as his voice filled the room. "Otis, look man, I know I screwed up," he began, sounding more annoyed than apologetic. "I was drunk, okay? We both were. It didn't mean anything. I'm sorry if it hurt you, but—" I stopped the voicemail right there. I couldn't take another second of his excuses. That evening, I got a text from Tabitha, my cousin, who was always in the middle of family drama. Tabitha, Michael told Aunt Rachel you're overreacting. He said it was just a stupid mistake and that you're blowing it out of proportion. Overreacting? Blowing it out of proportion? My fists clenched as I stared at the screen. Michael had managed to turn himself into the victim in less than 24 hours. Unbelievable. I typed back, "Tell him to stay the hell away from me." He made his choice. Tabitha didn't reply, but I didn't care. My focus was on the divorce now, on cutting every tie that bound me to Helen. If Michael wanted to dig his own grave, I wasn't going to stop him. But the family wasn't going to let this die quietly. By the next morning, I was already on edge. My phone had been a nonstop battlefield, with texts and calls coming from every corner of the family. Some people were outraged on my behalf. Others tried to stay neutral, spewing the same tired line about families sticking together. Then there were the ones like Aunt Rachel, who fell for Michael's charm and bought into his ridiculous, "we were drunk" excuse. I decided to meet my parents that afternoon. If I didn't set the record straight now, Michael would spin the story until he came out looking like the victim. The second I walked into their house, I could feel the tension. My mom was wringing her hands at the kitchen table, while my dad sat with his arms crossed, his face a mask of quiet anger. "You want to tell us what's really going on?" my dad said, his voice low but firm. I leaned against the counter, my stomach knotting. "What do you think is going on?" "Helen and Michael betrayed me. I caught them together at my party, in my bed." Mom flinched at my words, and Dad's jaw tightened. "Michael says it was a mistake," Mom said softly, "that he was drunk, and it didn't mean anything." "Of course he'd say that," I snapped. "But it wasn't just a one-off." Helen admitted she knew exactly what she was doing. "She called him by his name, Mom. They planned this." Dad let out a heavy sigh, shaking his head. "Christ, Otis. I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll hold him accountable," I said sharply, "because I'm done pretending like this is something we can fix. He's not my brother anymore. Not after this." "Don't say that," Mom pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. "You two have been close your whole lives. You can't just throw that away." I stared at her in disbelief. "He threw it away, not me. And if you expect me to forgive him, then you don't understand how much damage he's done." The room fell silent. Finally, Dad spoke up. "You're right," he said, his voice grim. "Michael crossed a line, and there's no excuse for it. But don't expect him to admit it, Otis. He's too proud for that." "I don't need him to admit anything," I said. "I just need him to stay out of my life." As I left their house, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. My dad's support meant something, but my mom's insistence on healing the family felt like a betrayal all its own. When I got back to my motel, I saw a notification on my phone, a friend request from Michael on a social media app. I opened it out of morbid curiosity, only to see that he'd posted some vague status about family drama and being misunderstood. The comments were full of sympathy from people who clearly didn't know the full story. I couldn't help myself. I left a single comment under his post. "Maybe if you hadn't slept with my wife, you wouldn't feel so misunderstood." The post was deleted within minutes, but the damage was done. Mutual friends started messaging me, asking if it was true. The whole situation was quickly spiraling out of Michael's control, and for the first time, I felt a small flicker of satisfaction. If Helen and Michael wanted to lie and manipulate their way out of this, they'd have to do it without my silence. A week after the party, things started to settle, or so I thought. Vanessa had taken over the legal side of the divorce, and I was staying in the motel while I waited for the court's temporary ruling on who could stay in the house. I was trying to focus on work and not let the chaos bleed into every part of my life, but Helen had other plans. It started with the texts. "Helen, please, Otis, can we talk?" "Helen, I'll do anything to fix this." "Helen, I miss you. I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond to any of them. I had nothing left to say. But then, a text came that caught my attention. "Helen, I'm pregnant." My heart stopped. The words stared back at me, sharp and impossible to ignore. I read the message over and over, my chest tightening with each pass. Was she serious? Or was this another one of her lies? Another ploy to keep me from walking away? My phone buzzed again. Helen, you can't just leave me, Otis. We have a baby on the way. I didn't believe her. Not right away. She was grasping at straws, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back in with a stunt like this. But the doubt crept in anyway. If there was even a small chance she was telling the truth. I called Vanessa. What happens if she's pregnant? I asked, my voice strained. First, Vanessa said firmly, you make her prove it. A pregnancy test, confirmed by a doctor. If it's real, we handle it. But don't let her derail your plans until you have proof. Vanessa's words steadied me. I called Helen and told her to meet me at a clinic the next morning. If she was lying, I'd know soon enough. The next day, I walked into the waiting room of the clinic, my stomach in knots. Helen was already there, looking disheveled but smug, like she thought she'd already won. I'm glad you came, she said softly, reaching for my arm. I pulled away, not even bothering to hide my disgust. Let's just get this over with, I said. The nurse called us in, and Helen took the test while I waited outside the room. The minutes dragged on like hours, every second feeding my anger and anxiety. When the nurse finally came out, she handed me a sealed envelope with the results. I opened it right there in the hallway. Negative. I let out a sharp breath, the relief mixing with fury as I turned to Helen. She looked nervous now, her confidence faltering. Negative, I said, holding up the paper. You lied. Her face crumpled, but I wasn't falling for her tears this time. I thought it would make you listen, she stammered. I didn't know what else to do. You didn't know what else to do, so you pretended to be pregnant? I said, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself, Helen? You're pathetic. She reached for me again, but I stepped back. We're done, I said coldly. For good this time. As I walked out of the clinic, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Helen had shown me exactly who she was, and I wasn't going to waste another second on her. But the damage she and Michael had done still lingered, and I knew the hardest part was yet to come. If I thought Helen's fake pregnancy stunt was the worst of it, I was dead wrong. Just as I was starting to find some clarity, Michael decided to crawl out of whatever rock he'd been hiding under. It started with a voicemail. Hey, Otis, his voice drawled, sounding far too casual for someone who detonated my life. Look, man, we need to talk. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. I get that you're upset, but you're making this way bigger than it needs to be. I'm still your brother and Helen. Well, she's not perfect, but she's still your wife. Maybe you should think about what you're throwing away. Throwing away? Throwing away? The audacity of this guy. I deleted the voicemail without responding, but of course, Michael didn't stop there. A few days later, I ran into him at a coffee shop. I should have known he'd be there. He loved to show his face around places he knew I frequented, probably hoping for some kind of dramatic showdown. Otis, he said, his tone dripping with fake concern. He was wearing that smug grin that used to charm everyone in the room, but now made me want to knock his teeth out. Can we sit down for a second? Talk like adults? I ignored him and kept walking, but he grabbed my arm. Come on, man, he said. This isn't how family handles things. Don't you dare talk to me about family, I hissed, jerking my arm away. He sighed dramatically, like I was the unreasonable one. Look, I know you're pissed and I get it. I really do. But you can't let this ruin us. We've got too much history to throw it all away over one mistake. One mistake? I said, my voice rising. You didn't just sleep with someone, Michael. You slept with my wife. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. And you're standing here acting like I should just let it go? People screw up, he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. It's not like I planned it. Things just happened. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming for me to punch him. But I held back. He wasn't worth it. You're a coward, I said, my voice low and steady. You don't take responsibility for anything, and you sure as hell aren't going to guilt me into forgiving you. I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there with that stupid, smug look wiped off his face. Later that night, I vented to Vanessa about the encounter. He's trying to make me feel like I'm the bad guy, I said, pacing her office. Like I'm overreacting for cutting him out. That's typical behavior for someone like him, she said. He knows he screwed up, but instead of owning it, he's deflecting. Don't let him get in your head, Otis. Focus on the divorce and on rebuilding your life. Her words grounded me. I wasn't going to let Michael or Helen drag me down anymore. But Michael's arrogance lit a fire in me, one I hadn't felt before. If he wanted to play games, I'd make sure he regretted every move. By now, I'd had enough of Michael and Helen's manipulative nonsense. The lies, the arrogance, the way they tried to paint me as the villain in this mess. It all fueled a fire inside me. I wasn't going to sit quietly while they walked away from the wreckage they caused. If they thought they could humiliate me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The first step was simple. I reached out to a friend of mine, Nate, who worked in IT. Nate was a wizard with tech, the guy everyone called when they needed help setting up a home network or fixing a crashed computer. He also had a knack for digging up dirt online. Anything public about Michael or Helen, I told him. Social media, forums, whatever. I want to know what they're saying and where they're saying it. It didn't take him long. A day later, Nate called me back. You're not going to like this, he said. Apparently, Michael had been bragging about his conquest on a private group chat with some old college buddies. Nate had screenshots of the messages, and they made my blood boil. Michael, yeah, it happened. I mean, come on. You've seen Helen. Who could resist? Friend number one. Dude, isn't that your brother's wife? Michael, she wasn't thinking about him when she was with me. There were more messages, each one more disgusting than the last. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the complete lack of remorse, the way he treated it like a joke. I forwarded the screenshots to Vanessa. She wasn't just my lawyer. She'd become my unofficial therapist through this whole ordeal. This changes things, she said, her voice sharp. If these messages go public, Michael's reputation will take a serious hit. He can't brush this off as a mistake anymore. Good, I said. It's time he faced some consequences. The next step was Helen. I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed, either. Remember all those designer bags and luxury spa days she'd charged to our joint account? Vanessa helped me draft a financial claim that outlined every unnecessary expense. We'll present this in court, Vanessa explained. It'll show the judge that she wasn't acting in good faith during your marriage. It could tip things in your favor when dividing assets. In the meantime, I decided to take matters into my own hands with a little social justice. I posted the screenshots of Michael's messages on a private subreddit frequented by people we both knew, friends, acquaintances, even a few coworkers. The post exploded. People were horrified, disgusted by his behavior. By the end of the week, Michael's reputation was in tatters. He lost a few freelance clients, and word got back to our extended family, who were less than pleased with his cavalier attitude. Helen wasn't spared, either. Once people saw the evidence of her spending habits and her role in the affair, she became a pariah in our social circles. I didn't feel guilty about any of it. They'd played dirty from the start, and I was just evening the score. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control again. The damage they'd caused couldn't be undone, but at least I could ensure they didn't escape it unscathed. Months passed, and the chaos of that night slowly began to fade. The divorce was finalized, and Vanessa delivered on her promise. I kept the house, most of the savings, and my dignity. Helen walked away with little more than her personal belongings and a tarnished reputation. Michael, on the other hand, was still reeling from the fallout. The screenshots of his smug, arrogant messages had spread farther than I'd intended. His name became a cautionary tale among our mutual friends and family. People didn't want to work with him, and his social circle shrank to almost nothing. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel satisfying at first. Watching the two of them face the consequences of their actions was like a balm for my anger. But over time, I realized something. They weren't worth the space they took up in my head. One day, as I was packing up a box of old things to donate, I came across a photo album. It was filled with pictures of Helen and me during the early years of our marriage. Vacations, family gatherings, lazy Sunday mornings. There was a time when we were happy, or at least I thought we were. I sat down with the album, flipping through the pages. The memories didn't hurt as much as I expected. If anything, they felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me who didn't know better. When I reached the end of the album, I closed it and set it aside. I didn't need it anymore. Helen was part of my past, but she didn't define my future. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. I sold the house and moved to a new place on the edge of town, a quiet neighborhood with plenty of space to breathe. I started going to the gym again, pouring my energy into something productive. I even picked up a new hobby, woodworking. It was therapeutic in a way I didn't expect, giving me a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Olivia, a friend who'd stood by me through everything, encouraged me to get out more. "You've been in survival mode long enough," she said one evening over drinks. "It's time to start living again." She was right. I started saying yes to things I would have avoided before: dinners with friends, hiking trips, even the occasional date. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. Looking back, I realized that Helen and Michael's betrayal had been a wake-up call. It forced me to take stock of my life, to reevaluate what I wanted and who I wanted to be. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond. Helen and Michael tried to break me, but they failed. Now, I'm stronger, wiser, and most importantly, free. Bye.